President-elect Donald Trump's comments on the NATO alliance and a possible peace deal for Ukraine are actually kind of hard to make sense of. But the one thing that he did do is accidentally drop some classified info on the state of the Ukrainian armed forces. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so Trump, to his credit, is trying to make good on his promise where he would end the Ukraine war day one before even taking office. He's actually trying to do it. And he's calling for an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine, but then also says the U.S. withdrawal from NATO is possible. So here's the deal. President Trump, of course, met with French President Emmanuel Macron and others in France to commemorate the opening of the Notre Dame Cathedral that was heavily damaged in a fire. Now, of course, Trump is saying that Zelensky and Ukraine would want to make a deal to stop the war, which is absolutely true. This is something that Ukraine has positioned for some time. And we've seen over time, both Ukraine and Russia have somewhat softened their stances on what it would take to get to sit down at the table. Ukraine much more so than Russia. Again, given the fact that Ukraine understands that, well, they depended on Western support, whereas Russia is much less dependent on external support. And frankly, Putin is on no one's timeline but his own. Now, what I thought was interesting is that Trump has said a couple of strange things, right? Including, he says that Trump said he'd be open to reducing military aid to Ukraine and even pulling the U.S. out of NATO. This is in a televised interview that aired Sunday. And this is the thing. I'm going to give him the most generous interpretation because I want good things to happen to the United States and Ukraine. And again, I'm rooting for the president and president-elect, whoever they are, to do well. And one of the things that I think Trump, the real estate negotiator, would be willing to do is say, basically, if it is conceivably possible, then it is on the table, right? Like, I don't like if you were building an apartment complex in Midtown, somebody asks, could you put a pool in here? I'm like, yeah, I could put a pool in here. It's possible. Am I going to? Unlikely. But again, even that's not true. In real estate, listen, for the right price, anything is possible. Okay. And I think Trump's just bringing that energy to this deal, right? So Putin, and it's sort of the opposite of what we have seen up until this point, in which both sides stake out the furthest possible positions so that when they sit at the table and they give stuff up, they're giving up like extreme positions and it makes them feel like they've compromised while not actually giving up anything they seriously believed was possible. Okay. So again, this is Ukraine saying, okay, for us to even start negotiations, this was their position as of about early 2023, was that Russia has to withdraw from all contested territories. And Russia, for their part, said the only way we'll even consider starting negotiations is if the entire Ukrainian armed forces puts down their arms, right? Neither of these things are even remotely realistic, and both sides knew it. But they wanted to say, they believed, one, that the calculus on the battlefield could shift in their favor, and that when they started to give things up at the negotiating table, they would have lots of stuff to give up before they centered on the real issues at hand. So I think Trump is trying to run the opposite playbook, to say, listen, instead of being like, when you sit at the table, by the time we sit at the table, these are the things that are here. He says, listen, sit at the table. The world is your oyster, right? We can do anything. Anything's possible. Everything from glassing Moscow to handing Vladimir Putin the keys to Medicare. It's all on the table. Well, sit down. Let's chat. Let's see what we can do. And, again, I respect it, right? Now, does that feel great if you're a NATO ally, hearing the president of the country that contributes 80% of NATO funding to say that we might pull out, right? Again, might is probably even strong. It's possible. And again, it's hard. But I think at this point, people understand Donald Trump just says stuff, right? And that's just part of how he operates, right? So I don't know if the markets aren't reacting like this is a realistic possibility. They're not even, allies are unlikely to even react the way they would if Joe Biden were to say it, right? Or Kamala Harris. If they were to say these things, people will go, damn, you don't put this stuff out into the ether unless you're serious. And these guys have all been briefed. Every other country is like, listen, Trump just says shit, so like, don't even worry about it. Now, what I thought was also bizarre is that Trump refused to comment if he had spoken to Putin since winning the election. He said, quote, I don't want to say anything about that because I don't want to do anything that could impede the negotiation, which is just, again, just a classic unforced error. It's sort of like saying if he didn't talk to Putin, there would be no negotiation. So the fact that he's literally said there is a negotiation between me and Putin is itself kind of confirming that it's happening. And it makes perfect sense because, again, it's been leaked from other sources that Trump confidant Elon Musk has been in direct contact with Putin and Putin proxies. So doesn't really shock anybody. And it's also been rumored that Tucker Carlson, in his interview with Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, is also acting as kind of an informal conduit between the Trump and the Trump White House and the Kremlin. So it's tough to say if this is actually going to go anywhere. Again, I think Trump's number one goal is to get two people into seats next to each other. And I think ultimately he's going to come to the same conclusion that most world leaders have for the last 3 years, that Trump, you have to create, Putin's a realist, and you have to make him think that the longer he waits, the worse his position gets. And unfortunately, for someone like the United States, that means Putin right now looks better and better as time goes on. And so there has to be, again, I think for Trump, it would be something, he sort of has maybe the right idea of like an escalatory ladder where the U.S. says, listen, in the next 90 days, if there's not a ceasefire, we're going to deploy F-35s to strike a limited set of targets within Russian-occupied Ukraine. And if that fails, then you go, okay, we're also authorizing additional strikes from U.S. cruise missiles. And then if that fails, we're going to authorize additional things. And you don't tell them exactly what it is. You just say, listen, there's going to be a continual, conventional, non-nuclear increase in aid, in military support, the longer that we go without a ceasefire and an agreement to negotiate, right? Even if the ceasefire is 2 weeks in length, a month in length. So again, and that's something where even to do that, the Ukrainian armed forces would have to feel that they are going to be able to also strengthen their position as much or more than Russia can for a pause in the fighting. Because again, Russia is always bringing in tens of thousands of new troops to their military every month, while Ukraine really struggles to get even 5,000. It's considered a good month for them. So this is, the delta, the advantage of a ceasefire skews in Russia's favor. So something has to skew a ceasefire in Ukraine's favor. And again, I think that would be something like a growing guarantees of U.S. support, where we say, listen, if Putin resumes hostilities, he's going to end up at level 7 on the ladder, But again, is Trump going to come up with this like game theory type of coercion? I don't know. And I don't even know necessarily if that will work. Putin is a calculated guy and he is a deliberate guy and he definitely understands how democracies work. So, but I want to talk about one other weird aspect of this, and that is Trump disclosing some pretty sensitive information about the Ukrainian military. But before I do that, first off, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. That makes a tremendous difference for me. It really helps tell the YouTube algorithm that I'm one of the legitimate creators in the Ukraine war space. But also, more importantly, if you're looking to crush this holiday season, right? You might need a little extra caffeine. I get it. It's dark out and everybody's got a lot more going on. So you want some Strike Gum. I created Strike Gum inspired by my time in Afghanistan when I had to carry around an energy drink. And if you've ever had an energy drink in the hot Afghan desert on a hot day on a long combat patrol, you're like, damn, there's got to be something better. That's why I created Strike Gum, right? 90 milligrams of caffeine in every piece, 100 milligrams of alpha GPC, 0 sugar. That's as much as a Red Bull or an Amp Energy in just one piece of gum. So check us out, strikegum.com, or you can go to Amazon, just search for Strike Gum. We're the highest rated energy gum on there. You can't miss us. Okay, so here's where things get even more somewhat annoying, right? The first is that Trump, in this press conference, accidentally dropped some classified info. Trump said, quote, Kiev had, quote, ridiculously lost 400,000 soldiers and many more civilians. Now, one, having been to Ukraine and talked to those soldiers, they did not ridiculously lose their lives or get injured. They did so in defense of their country, and calling it ridiculous is pretty stupid. And if it's ridiculous that Ukraine lost 400,000 soldiers, boy, wait till you hear about what happened to those 800,000 Russians. They too have been lost in an even more ridiculous war because Putin was doing fine. The Russian economy was fine. And instead now they've smoked 1 million fucking dudes, or nearly 1 million Russians. And again, Trump appears to not be able to distinguish between wounded and killed, simply describing them as lost, soldiers lost, which, as if you've been on this channel, you know that Kiev had to then go into damage control mode. Kiev put out, they said, listen, we've actually had 43,000 Ukrainian soldiers killed, which is in the war so far, and 370 wounded, right? Now, what's interesting, and as Zelensky points out, is that this 370, as we talk about on this channel, includes everything from, permanent paralysis, living as a vegetable, all the way to lightly wounded soldiers who return to duty. And for example, there was a recent interview with the commander of Chosen Company of the Ukrainian Foreign Legion who said, he's like, we have a soldier who was wounded 6 times and just keeps returning to duty, right? Because again, most shrapnel wounds, you're going to get body armor. It's going to get to your extremities. You're going to be okay. And unusually, Zelensky actually went and confirmed that approximately 50% of the wounded actually end up returned to service, right? And again, all injuries are recorded, including minor and repeated ones. So, this 370,000 people does not mean 370,000 are walking around with no limbs, and certainly some are. But again, 50% of those are returned to duty. So, in terms of the actual, but that's likely also true of Russian losses, right? And the fact is that most U.S. intel also confirms that Russian losses are indeed around 750,000, including about 200,000 killed. So, Ukrainians are out there killing Russians 4-1, which is pretty absurd. And again, 500,000 wounded. And this reflects at least what I saw in Ukraine as far as Russian tactics. Russian tactics is simply much more willing to kill their infantry. Ukraine, in contrast, much more willing to preserve their infantry. And it shows on the battlefield, right? Ukraine is willing to withdraw their infantry from compromised positions, even if that means yielding some low-value terrain to Russia. In contrast, Russia, in its commitment to take every ounce of terrain possible, is willing to send soldiers at a frightening scale to conduct these kind of the non-demonetized word is a one-way assault, right? But imagine you're one of these soldiers in Toretsk, right? I talked to some of the units fighting in Toretsk, and the fact is that Russian troops, they are the ones who have to come out of these holes, expose themselves, and the Ukrainians are doing everything in their power to absolutely just obliterate these soldiers. As soon as their positions are detected, Ukrainian drones will swarm them. Now, the Russians, of course, try to do the same thing, but the key difference is the Ukrainians aren't looking to, don't have a strategy that focuses on territorial gain. So, overall, I think this is a pretty not that optimistic a sign. It feels a little bit like we're trying to relearn statecraft in real time. And again, when you see unforced errors, it's just like baseball, right? There's obviously players of different skill and there's different strategies, but an unforced error is an unforced error. And when you see these sort of things, like a player make an unforced error, you worry that you're not seeing the 5D chess that you might, some people hope is occurring. But again, like I said, I root for whoever's in the White House because I believe in our country. All right. And I'm here to see democracies thrive, and I'm also kind of here to see dictatorships get what's coming to them. Anyway, guys, hit that subscribe button. Huge thank you to all the Colonel tier crew like James Sterling, Steve Moran, Doug Beck, Alan Knutson, Bastian Himmling, Brian Kelly, Del McCombs, James Ola, Henry Roussier, all of our lieutenant tier members. I could not do this without you guys. I really appreciate you so much, and I will see you over on the next one. Cheers.